The last words my stepson said to me were, "Disappear. Forever." 48 hours later, the house was gone. The moving truck had pulled away at dawn, leaving nothing but tire marks in the driveway and a for sale sign that had been replaced with "sold" in bold red letters. My neighbors watched from behind their curtains, whispering, wondering, but none of them knew the truth. None of them understood that this wasn't a panic decision or a moment of weakness. This was survival. And by the time they realized why I sold the house, by the time anyone understood what had been happening inside those walls, it would already be too late. Because what I discovered hidden in that house, what my stepson Daniel had been planning, wasn't just about money or inheritance or family grudges. It was something far darker, something that made my blood run cold every time I remembered his eyes that last day, the way he smiled when he told me to disappear, like he'd been rehearsing that moment for months. If you're hooked by this story, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will shock you. Drop a comment telling me if you'd have seen the warning signs. I never imagined my life would become this. When I married Robert 15 years ago, I thought I'd found my forever home, my safe place after years of loneliness following my first husband's death. Robert was kind, gentle, a widower himself who understood grief in ways most people couldn't. He had a son, Daniel, who was 23 at the time, fresh out of college and struggling to find his place in the world. I tried to be welcoming, never wanting to replace his mother, but hoping we could build something new together, something that honored the past while creating space for the future. Those first few years were beautiful. Robert and I traveled, renovated the old Victorian house he'd owned for decades, planted gardens, hosted holiday dinners. Daniel would visit occasionally, always polite, always distant, but I told myself it was natural, that he needed time to adjust to his father's new marriage. I never pushed, never demanded affection or closeness. I simply tried to be present, to be kind, to show him through quiet actions that I cared about his well-being and respected his place in Robert's life. Remember to like this video and subscribe for more true crime stories. Comment below with your thoughts so far. But everything changed when Robert died 3 years ago. The heart attack came suddenly, violently, stealing him from us on a Tuesday morning while he was reading the newspaper in his favorite chair. I found him there, still holding the sports section, his reading glasses halfway down his nose. The grief nearly destroyed me. For months I could barely function, moving through the house like a ghost, seeing Robert in every corner, every photograph, every piece of furniture we'd chosen together. Daniel came to the funeral, stood beside me during the service, even held my hand as they lowered his father into the ground. I thought maybe, finally, we'd found common ground in our shared loss. I thought maybe Robert's death would bring us closer, unite us in mourning. I was wrong. So terribly, tragically wrong. Because what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known then, was that Daniel hadn't been mourning beside me at that funeral. He'd been calculating, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The first signs were subtle. He started visiting more frequently, showing up unannounced on weekends, letting himself in with the key Robert had given him years ago. At first, I was grateful for the company, happy to have family around during those dark months. Like and subscribe if you're following along, and comment what you think Daniel was really planning. We'd sit in the kitchen drinking coffee, talking about Robert, sharing memories. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the conversations began to shift. Daniel would mention the house, its value, the rising property prices in our neighborhood. He'd comment on the maintenance costs, the property taxes, how difficult it must be for me to manage everything alone. "This is a lot of house for one person," he'd say, his voice dripping with concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Have you thought about what you'll do long term? Maybe something smaller would be better, easier to manage at your age." At your age. The phrase stung every time, even though I was only 62, healthy, active, perfectly capable of maintaining my own home. But Daniel said it so often, with such casual cruelty, that I started to wonder if maybe he was right. Maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe I couldn't handle this life alone. That's how manipulation works, I learned. It's not loud or obvious. It creeps in slowly, disguised as concern, masked as love, until you start doubting your own reality. The visits became more frequent, more intrusive. Daniel would walk through the house like he was inspecting it, running his fingers along furniture, examining the crown molding, checking the basement for moisture problems. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you've ever dealt with a manipulative family member. Just looking out for the investment, he'd explain when I questioned his behavior. Dad would want someone to keep an eye on things. The investment. That's what our home had become to him. Not the place where his father had lived and loved and built a life, but an asset, a number on a balance sheet, something to be managed and eventually claimed. Then came the financial questions. Did I have a will? Had I updated it since Robert's death? Who was listed as beneficiary on the life insurance? What about the retirement accounts? Had I considered setting up a trust? Every conversation felt like an interrogation, and I found myself growing defensive, protective of information I'd never thought to hide before. These are private matters, Daniel, I'd say, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to let him see how uncomfortable he made me. But he'd just smile, that same rehearsed smile that never quite reached his eyes, and remind me that he was family, that he was only trying to help, that someone needed to make sure I didn't make any costly mistakes. As if my entire existence after Robert's death was just a series of potential errors waiting to happen. My neighbors started noticing the change. Margaret from across the street mentioned that she'd seen Daniel's car parked in my driveway at odd hours, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning before I'd even woken up. Hit that like button and subscribe for the full story, and comment if you think the neighbor should have done more. Is everything all right, dear? She'd ask, her face lined with genuine concern. He seems to be around quite a lot lately. I brushed it off, made excuses, told her Daniel was just being a dutiful son, checking on his elderly stepmother. Elderly. Another word that had started creeping into my vocabulary, another way of diminishing myself, making myself smaller, less capable, less worthy of independence. But Margaret wasn't convinced. She'd known me for 20 years, had watched me renovate this house room by room, had seen me handle everything from burst pipes to roof repairs without hesitation. She knew I wasn't some fragile old woman who needed constant supervision. You call me if you need anything, she said, squeezing my hand with an intensity that suggested she understood more than she was saying. Any time, day or night. Promise me. I promised, but I never called. Pride, shame, denial, maybe a combination of all three kept me silent. I kept telling myself that Daniel meant well, that he was processing his grief in his own way, that I was being paranoid and oversensitive. I kept making excuses for behavior that should have sent me running, that should have triggered every alarm bell in my head. Because I wanted to believe in family, in blood ties, in the idea that Robert's son wouldn't dare harm the woman his father had loved. Like this video and subscribe to see how this nightmare unfolds. Comment your predictions below. The real shift came about 6 months after Robert's death. Daniel showed up on a Tuesday afternoon with a stack of documents and a man in an expensive suit he introduced as his lawyer. "We need to talk about the house," Daniel announced, settling himself at my kitchen table like he owned the place, spreading papers across the surface I'd just cleaned. "About securing your future and making sure Dad's legacy is protected." His lawyer, a thin man with cold eyes and colder hands, began explaining something about power of attorney, about estate planning, about the importance of making sure assets were properly managed and protected from potential creditors or predatory individuals who might try to take advantage of a widow living alone. The words washed over me in waves, legal jargon I didn't fully understand, terms and conditions and clauses that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. "All you need to do is sign here," the lawyer said, sliding a document toward me, his pen hovering expectantly. "This ensures that Daniel can help manage the property, make necessary decisions if you become incapacitated, handle financial matters in your best interest." But something in his tone, something in the way Daniel watched me with barely concealed eagerness, made me pause. "I'd like to review these with my own lawyer first," I said, pushing the papers back across the table. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment if you think she made the right choice refusing to sign. Daniel's face hardened, the mask of concern slipping just enough for me to glimpse the rage beneath. "Your own lawyer?" he repeated, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I'm bringing you solutions, and you're treating me like some kind of criminal. This is what Dad would have wanted. This is about protecting what he built." But I stood firm, something in me finally awakening, finally recognizing danger when it sat at my kitchen table wearing a suit and fake smile. "Then he would understand why I need to be careful," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. "I'll review these documents and get back to you." The lawyer and Daniel exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher, then gathered their papers with sharp, angry movements. "You're making a mistake," Daniel said as he reached the door, his hand gripping the frame so tightly his knuckles went white. "You're going to regret this." After they left, I sat in that kitchen for hours, staring at the space where those documents had been, replaying every conversation, every visit, every seemingly innocent comment Daniel had made over the past months. And slowly, terrifyingly, a pattern emerged. This wasn't grief. This wasn't concern. This was a calculated plan to gain control of everything Robert had left behind, with me as the obstacle standing in his way. Like and subscribe to support this channel, and comment what you would do in this situation. I called Margaret that night, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. She came over immediately, listened to everything, held my hand while I cried, and then said something that changed everything. "Sarah, my daughter's a real estate attorney. Would you let me have her look into this?" Within 24 hours, Margaret's daughter Emma had reviewed my situation and delivered news that made my blood run cold. The documents Daniel had tried to get me to sign would have given him complete control over the property, the ability to make all decisions regarding its sale or transfer, and crucially, the power to have me declared incompetent and placed in assisted living if he deemed it necessary. "This isn't estate planning," Emma explained, her voice heavy with concern. "This is a blueprint for legal theft. If you'd sign these documents, you would have essentially given him permission to take everything and institutionalize you if you resisted." The room spun. My stepson, the boy I'd tried to welcome into my life, the son of the man I'd loved, had been planning to steal my home and lock me away. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. But Emma wasn't finished. "There's more," she continued, pulling out additional documents she'd obtained through her own investigation. "Daniel's been in significant financial trouble for the past 2 years. Gambling debts, failed business ventures, creditors threatening legal action. He's been counting on this inheritance, probably promised people he'd have access to these assets. When your husband's will left everything to you with only a modest trust for Daniel, it must have seemed like a disaster to him." Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more shocking true stories. Comment if this twist surprised you. So it wasn't about grief or family legacy or protecting his father's memory. It was about money, pure and simple. Daniel was desperate, drowning in debt, and saw me as nothing more than an inconvenient barrier between him and financial salvation. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's behavior escalated dramatically. He showed up at my house multiple times a day, sometimes pounding on the door, sometimes just sitting in his car outside, watching, waiting. He left voicemails that started pleading and ended threatening. "You're being selfish," one message hissed. "You're stealing from family. Dad would be ashamed of you." Another was more direct. "Sign the fucking papers, Sarah. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I installed security cameras, changed the locks, kept detailed records of every interaction. Emma advised me to file for a restraining order, but I hesitated, still clinging to some foolish hope that we could resolve this without involving the courts, without destroying what little remained of our family connection. That hesitation almost cost me everything. One night, around 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of someone moving around downstairs. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers while trying to stay quiet, trying not to alert whoever was in my house to my presence. The operator's calm voice instructed me to stay in my locked bedroom until police arrived. Like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts as this story reaches its darkest moment. Those 15 minutes felt like 15 hours, every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound amplified by terror. When police finally arrived and searched the house, they found Daniel in the basement, a crowbar in his hand, standing in front of my safe where I kept important documents, jewelry, and a significant amount of cash. He claimed he'd been worried about me, that he'd used his old key to check on me, and heard suspicious noises that led him to investigate. But the crowbar, the time of night, his position in front of a safe he shouldn't have known existed, all told a different story. The officers arrested him for breaking and entering, though he was released on bail within hours. That's when I knew this wasn't going to stop. Daniel wasn't going to give up, wasn't going to accept defeat, wasn't going to let me live in peace. As long as I owned that house, as long as I stood between him and what he believed was rightfully his, I would never be safe. The next confrontation came 3 days later, in broad daylight, in my own kitchen where I'd once felt so secure. Daniel appeared without warning, somehow having obtained another key, and I looked up from my morning coffee to find him standing in the doorway, blocking my exit, his face twisted with an emotion I could no longer pretend was anything other than pure hatred. Remember to like this video and subscribe as we approach the moment everything changes. Comment what you think happens next. I gave you chances, he said, his voice eerily calm, more frightening in its control than any screaming could have been. I tried to do this the easy way, the legal way, the way that would have let you keep your dignity. But you had to be difficult. You had to be ungrateful. I stood slowly, keeping the kitchen table between us, my phone in my pocket but out of reach, my mind racing through options and finding none that felt safe. Daniel, you need to leave. The police know about the other night. If you threaten me again. Threaten you? He laughed, a sound devoid of humor, empty of anything human. I'm trying to help you, Sarah. I'm trying to solve a problem for both of us. But you're too stubborn, too selfish to see it. He took a step closer, and I saw something in his eyes then, something that made every survival instinct I possess scream danger. This wasn't just about money anymore, if it ever had been. This was about power, control, rage that had been building for years, perhaps since his father first chose to marry me, perhaps since Robertsville made clear who he truly valued. Here's what's going to happen, Daniel continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more menacing. You're going to sign those papers. You're going to transfer the property. You're going to do it willingly, voluntarily, with a smile on your face. Because if you don't, if you keep fighting me on this, things are going to get very difficult for you. Hit that like button and subscribe to see how this confrontation ends. Let me know in the comments if you're still watching. Are you threatening me? I asked, proud that my voice barely shook, that I managed to meet his eyes even as fear threatened to paralyze me. I'm giving you advice, he replied. I'm telling you how this ends. One way or another, I'm getting what Dad should have left me. What should have been mine all along. You can make this easy, or you can make it hard, but the outcome will be the same. He stepped closer again, close enough now that I could smell coffee on his breath, see the bloodshot quality of his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept in days. Do everyone a favor, Sarah. Do the smart thing for once in your pathetic life. He leaned even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that would haunt me for months to come. Disappear. Forever. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication, loaded with meaning that went far beyond their simple surface. This wasn't just telling me to leave town, or stay out of his way. This was something darker, something final, something that made every cell in my body scream run. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, locked in a moment that would change everything. Then Daniel smiled, that rehearsed smile I'd seen so many times before, turned and walked out of my kitchen, out of my house, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and his words echoing in my head. Disappear forever. Like this video and subscribe for the incredible conclusion to this story. Comment if you think she should have called the police right then. For the rest of that day, I couldn't stop replaying the confrontation, analyzing every word, every gesture, every implication. The tone of his voice when he said those final words wasn't angry or threatening in an obvious way. It was matter of fact, almost helpful, like he was giving me genuinely good advice. But underneath that calm exterior, I'd heard something else, something that sounded like a plan already in motion, like he'd been rehearsing that moment for weeks or months. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed threatening, and I kept my phone clutched in my hand, ready to call for help at the first sign of danger. But it wasn't physical safety I was most worried about anymore. It was something more insidious, more terrifying because I couldn't quite define it. Daniel wasn't just after my money or my house. He wanted me gone, erased, removed from existence as thoroughly as if I'd never married his father, never entered their lives, never dared to accept Robert's love. The next morning, I made a decision that would seem crazy to everyone who knew me, that would raise questions and concerns and accusations. But it was also the decision that would save my life, though I wouldn't fully understand that for months to come. I called a real estate agent I'd never met before, someone with no connection to me or Daniel or anyone in our social circle. "I need to sell my house," I told her.
Fast.
As fast as legally possible. Cash buyer, no contingencies, I don't care about getting top dollar. I just need it done. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Remember to like and subscribe as the story takes its most shocking turn. Comment whether you think this was brave or cowardly. Mrs. Harrison, are you sure? This seems very sudden. Houses in your neighborhood usually take months to sell properly, and if you're willing to wait, I'm not willing to wait. I interrupted, my voice firm despite the chaos in my mind. I need this done within 2 weeks if possible. Can you help me or not? She could, and she did. Within 3 days, I had an offer from a cash buyer, an investor looking to flip properties in established neighborhoods. The price was $60,000 below market value, a loss that made the agent wince, but I didn't hesitate. I signed everything, accepted every term, agreed to a 30-day close with the understanding I'd be out in 2 weeks. Then came the hard part, packing up 15 years of life, sorting through memories and possessions, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. I worked mostly at night, after dark, with the curtains drawn, not wanting neighbors or especially Daniel to see what I was doing. I hired movers from 2 towns over, paid extra for them to come on a Tuesday morning when most people would be at work. I didn't tell Margaret what I was planning, didn't say goodbye to any of my friends, didn't notify anyone of my intentions. I simply erased myself from that life as completely and quickly as possible, exactly as Daniel had told me to do. Except I wasn't running out of fear alone. I was running with purpose, with evidence, with a plan of my own that Daniel would never see coming. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to find out what her plan was. Comment your theories below. Because while I'd been packing, while I'd been sorting through Robert's things and my own possessions, I'd been documenting everything. Every threatening voicemail from Daniel was backed up to the cloud. Every text message was screenshot and stored in multiple locations. I'd written detailed accounts of every conversation, every confrontation, every moment that had made me feel unsafe. I'd made copies of all the legal documents Daniel had tried to pressure me into signing, along with Emma's analysis of what they truly meant. I'd photographed the crowbar the police had confiscated from my basement, obtained copies of the arrest report, documented every instance of harassment with timestamps and witnesses when available. And I'd done something else, something I hadn't told anyone about, not even Emma or Margaret. 3 weeks before I sold the house, I'd hired a private investigator to look into Daniel's activities. What he uncovered was far worse than gambling debts and failed businesses. Daniel had been systematically planning my disappearance for months. The investigator found records of searches on Daniel's computer, how to have someone declared mentally incompetent, power of attorney abuse, untraceable poisons, making a death look like natural causes. He'd visited nursing homes in 3 different states, inquiring about facilities that handled difficult patients, asking about security measures, and how hard it would be for residents to leave or communicate with the outside world. He'd researched my medical history, obtained copies of my prescriptions, talked to people about my habits and routines. Like and subscribe as we uncover the full extent of Daniel's plan. Comment if this is the most disturbing story you've heard. Most chilling of all, He'd taken out a life insurance policy on me 6 months earlier, listing himself as beneficiary, using the power of attorney documents he'd created, but that I'd never signed. Somehow he'd forged my signature, filed paperwork claiming I'd granted him that authority, and the insurance company had accepted it without verification. If anything happened to me, if I died or disappeared, Daniel stood to collect $2 million on top of inheriting the house and all of Robert's remaining assets. The investigator, a retired police detective named Marcus, sat across from me in a coffee shop 3 towns over and delivered this information with a grimness that told me he'd seen a lot in his career, but this still shocked him. "Mrs. Harrison, this man is dangerous. This isn't just about money or property disputes. He's been planning something for months, maybe longer. You need to go to the police immediately." But I shook my head, my mind already working through the implications and possibilities. The police can't do anything until he actually commits a crime. Everything you found, all of it could be explained away as research, curiosity, maybe planning for worst-case scenarios. The forged power of attorney is the only concrete crime, but even that would be hard to prove if he claims I actually did sign it and simply forgot or am lying now to cut him out. Marcus leaned back, studying me with new interest. "So, what are you planning to do?" "I'm going to disappear," I said simply. Exactly like he wants. But on my terms, my way, with enough evidence left behind to bury him. Remember to hit like and subscribe as the brilliant plan unfolds. Drop a comment with your reaction. Over the next week, I finalized everything. The house sale went through without complications. The buyers were a young couple from California who never asked questions, never wondered why I was selling so quickly, just transferred the money and started planning their renovations. I moved my belongings into a storage unit 4 states away, kept only what I could fit in my car, and opened new bank accounts in a name I'd legally changed to months earlier when I first started feeling unsafe. Margaret noticed the moving truck despite my best efforts at secrecy. She came running across the street in her bathrobe, her face stricken with worry and confusion. "Sarah, what's happening? Where are you going?" I pulled her aside, away from the movers, away from any potential witnesses or recording devices Daniel might have planted. "I can't explain everything now, but I need you to trust me. I'm not safe here, and the only way to protect myself is to leave. Completely and totally." "But Daniel is why I'm leaving," I interrupted gently. "And I need you to do something for me. In 3 days, you're going to get a package. Inside will be a letter with instructions. Follow them exactly. Give the materials to the lawyer I've specified, and don't tell anyone about this conversation. Can you do that for me?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Call me when you're safe," she whispered. "However long it takes, just let me know you're all right." I promised I would, though I had no idea how long that might be. Like this video and subscribe to see what happened after she vanished. Comment if you think she made the right choice. The day I left was gray and cold, appropriate weather for disappearing from a life I'd built and loved. I took one last walk through the empty house, my footsteps echoing in rooms that had once been full of laughter and warmth and hope. I stood in the kitchen where Daniel had threatened me, in the bedroom where I'd spent countless sleepless nights after Robert died, in the living room where we'd celebrated holidays and anniversaries and all the small moments that make up a life. Then I locked the door for the final time, left the keys in the mailbox for the new owners, and drove away without looking back. I didn't go far at first, just to a hotel in the next state where I could monitor news from my old town and wait for the fallout. It came faster than I expected. Daniel showed up at the house 3 days after I left, apparently having been out of town and unaware of the sale. According to Margaret, who called me on a burner phone I'd given her for emergencies, his reaction was spectacular. He screamed at the new owners, claimed they'd bought stolen property, threatened lawsuits and police action. When they showed him the legitimate sale documents with my signature and the full paper trail, he'd stood in the driveway for 20 minutes, just staring at the house like he couldn't comprehend what had happened. Then he called the police and reported me missing. The investigation that followed was exactly what I'd hoped for, though watching it unfold from a distance was surreal and terrifying in equal measure. Don't forget to like and subscribe as the investigation begins. Comment what you think the police found. Daniel told investigators that I'd been acting erratically for months, that he'd been concerned about my mental state, that the sudden sale of the house without telling any family was clear evidence of diminished capacity or worse. He suggested I might have been coerced or manipulated by the buyers, that perhaps I'd been taken advantage of by criminals, that maybe I hadn't left voluntarily at all. He played the concerned stepson perfectly, tears in his eyes as he described how he'd only wanted to help me, how he'd tried to get me proper legal and financial advice, how I'd rejected all his attempts at assistance. For a few days, the police seemed to believe him. They traced my movements, found the movers I'd hired, interviewed the real estate agent, looked into my bank accounts. But then they found the evidence I'd left behind. Margaret delivered the package as instructed, bringing it to Emma, who immediately contacted the lead investigator on my missing person case. Inside was everything: copies of Daniel's threatening voicemails and text messages, my detailed written accounts of every confrontation, the private investigator's report on Daniel's research and planning, evidence of the forged power of attorney and illegal insurance policy, and a notarized statement from me explaining that I was leaving voluntarily, that I was of sound mind, that I feared for my safety, and that Daniel was the reason for both my fear and my departure. The case shifted immediately from a missing person investigation to a criminal investigation focused on Daniel. Like this video and subscribe to see justice unfold. Comment whether you think this was enough evidence. Police obtained warrants to search Daniel's home and computer, and what they found was even more damning than what my private investigator had uncovered. Detailed plans for how to access my house when I was sleeping, including a copy of a key he'd had made and blueprints showing the location of my bedroom. Research on medications that could be slipped into food or drink to cause apparent heart attacks or strokes. Notes about my daily routines, where I shopped, when I was typically home alone, which neighbors were most likely to notice unusual activity. And most chilling of all, they found the hidden room. The new homeowners had called police about some odd renovations they discovered in the basement, modifications that hadn't been on any inspection reports. Behind a false wall, investigators found a small, soundproof space about 6 by 8 feet, completely empty except for mounting brackets on the walls that could have held cameras or other surveillance equipment, and scratches on the floor suggesting furniture had been dragged in and out. Analysis of the construction materials dated the room to about 8 months earlier, right around the time Daniel's visits had become more frequent. The forensic team found his fingerprints throughout the space, along with traces of sedatives, zip ties that had been cut away, and a calendar marked with dates that corresponded to times I'd been out of the house for extended periods. Remember to like and subscribe as the darkest revelation emerges. Comment your reaction to this discovery. The investigators' theory, supported by extensive evidence, was that Daniel had been planning to kidnap me, hold me in that hidden room in my own basement, and either coerce me into signing over all assets or simply wait until my absence could be used to have me declared dead and claim everything. The soundproofing would have prevented anyone from hearing if I'd called for help. The location in my own home meant he had legitimate reasons to be on the property. And if things went wrong, if I died during the captivity, whether intentionally or accidentally, he could have claimed he knew nothing about it, that I must have been taken by someone else, that the hidden room was as much a surprise to him as to everyone else. It was a plan so calculated, so cold-blooded, that even hardened detectives were shaken by the implications. Daniel was arrested on multiple charges: attempted kidnapping, fraud, forgery, making false statements to police, and a list of other crimes that kept growing as investigators dug deeper. His lawyer tried to claim everything was circumstantial, that the hidden room could have been built by previous owners, that the research on his computer was for a novel he'd been writing, that the threatening messages were taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the insurance fraud involving the forged power of attorney was impossible to explain away. 3 months after I disappeared, Daniel pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Standing in the courtroom for sentencing, watching through a video feed from my undisclosed location, I finally felt something close to safety. But it wasn't triumph or satisfaction. It was just exhaustion and sadness that it had come to this, that someone I'd tried to welcome into my life had been willing to go to such monstrous lengths out of nothing more than greed and entitlement. Like and subscribe as we reach the resolution. Comment whether you think the sentence was fair. The prosecutor read my victim impact statement to the court since I still wasn't comfortable appearing in person. In it, I described the fear of living in my own home, the betrayal of realizing someone I'd considered family wanted me dead, the loss of not just my house but my entire life, my community, my friends, everything familiar and comfortable. I talked about the nightmares I still had, waking up convinced I heard someone in my house, panic attacks triggered by unexpected knocks on doors. I explained that while I'd survived physically, part of me had died in that kitchen when Daniel told me to disappear forever, the part that believed in the basic goodness of people, that trusted in family bonds, that felt safe anywhere in the world. The judge listened to every word, then turned to Daniel and delivered a statement that would stay with me forever. "You didn't just plan to steal from your stepmother," he said, his voice heavy with disgust. "You planned to erase her, to remove her from existence for no reason other than your own selfish greed. You built a prison in her own home, researched ways to kill her that would seem natural, created an elaborate scheme to make her disappearance look like anything but what it was. And when she had the courage and intelligence to escape your trap, you tried to manipulate law enforcement into helping you find her. You are a danger to society and will remain so for many years to come." 15 years. It seemed simultaneously like too much and not enough. But it gave me time to rebuild somewhere new, time to heal, time to maybe someday feel safe again. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the conclusion. Comment what you think her life is like now. That was 2 years ago. Today, I live in a small town across the country where no one knows my story, where I'm just another retiree who moved for the weather or to be near family or for whatever simple reason people relocate. I have a modest house, a garden I tend every morning, and a few friends I've carefully cultivated, though I've never told them about my past. I still use my new name, still look over my shoulder sometimes, still check locks twice before going to bed. But slowly, gradually, the fear is fading. Margaret visits twice a year, the only person from my old life I've maintained contact with. We drink tea in my garden and talk about everything except Daniel, except the house, except that whole nightmare chapter that still feels unreal sometimes. She tells me about the new family living in what was once my home, how they renovated the basement and filled the place with children and laughter. I'm glad something good came from that space, glad it's no longer haunted by what might have been. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't sold the house, if I'd stood my ground and fought Daniel through legal channels instead of running. Emma assured me that I would likely have won eventually, that the evidence against him was strong even before the hidden room was discovered. But eventually isn't soon enough when someone is planning your murder. Eventually doesn't help if you're already dead or imprisoned in your own basement. The truth is, disappearing forever turned out to be the smartest thing I ever did, even though it meant losing everything I'd built with Robert, even though it meant walking away from a life I loved. Like and subscribe for my final thoughts on the story. Comment whether you think she should have done anything differently. Because survival isn't always heroic or dramatic or satisfying. Sometimes survival is quiet and sad and looks like giving up everything to stay alive. Sometimes survival means the villain wins the house and the money and the physical things, but you keep your life and your sanity and your freedom. Sometimes survival means understanding that things, even precious things, even things tied to people you loved, are just things. They can be replaced or left behind if that's what it takes to see another sunrise. I think about Robert often, about what he would say if he knew what his son had planned. Part of me believes he knew Daniel was troubled, that he left everything to me not just out of love, but out of a desire to protect his assets from his son's recklessness. Maybe Robert saw the darkness in Daniel long before I did. Maybe that's why their relationship was always slightly strained, slightly distant. Or maybe I'm giving Robert too much credit, projecting wisdom onto a man who simply loved me and wanted to take care of me, without any grand strategy or foresight. Either way, I kept my promise to Robert in the way that mattered most. I survived. I built a new life. I didn't let Daniel's evil destroy who I am at my core, even if it changed some fundamental things about how I see the world and the people in it. I'm more cautious now, more guarded, slower to trust. But I'm alive, and I'm free, and I'm writing this story not as a victim, but as someone who fought back in the only way available and won. The house is gone. The money from the sale is mostly gone too, spent on lawyers and investigations, and starting over. But I wake up every morning without fear, walk through my new home without jumping at shadows, sleep through the night without nightmares of hidden rooms and forged documents and stepchildren who see you as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. Like this video and subscribe if this story moved you. Comment your biggest takeaway from what you've heard. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that you can't always fight monsters directly. Sometimes you have to be smarter, quieter, more strategic. Sometimes you have to give them what they think they want while actually giving them the rope to hang themselves. Daniel wanted me to disappear, so I did, but I disappeared on my terms with evidence that would ensure he faced justice for what he'd planned. He got the house, but I got my life. And when investigators found what he'd hidden in that basement, when the full extent of his plan became clear, the house became the very evidence that convicted him. It was poetic in a way I'm sure he never saw coming. The last thing I want to say is this. If you're reading this story and seeing yourself in it, if you have someone in your life who makes you feel unsafe or controlled or pressured to give up things that belong to you, trust your instincts. Trust that feeling in your gut that tells you something is wrong even when everyone else says you're overreacting. Trust yourself enough to walk away from people, places, and things if that's what safety requires. Because no house, no inheritance, no relationship is worth your life. Nothing is worth surrendering your freedom or autonomy or peace of mind. And if someone tells you to disappear, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is take them at their word, but do it in a way that protects you and exposes them. 2 years later, Daniel is still in prison with 13 years remaining on his sentence. I'm still in my quiet town with my garden and my new name and my hard-won peace. The house sold again last year to another family who knows nothing of its history. And I'm finally, slowly, learning to be happy again, learning that survival isn't just about staying alive, but about building something worth living for after the threat has passed. That's the real victory. Not the legal outcome or the justice system working, but reclaiming joy and purpose after someone tried to take everything from you. Disappearing forever turned out to be the beginning of a new life rather than the end of everything. And some days, most days now, that feels like enough. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your thoughts. Would you have done the same thing in her position? What do you think about how this all played out? I read every comment and love hearing your perspectives. Stay safe out there, trust your instincts, and remember that sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do.